The proposed amendment number 4 is another amendment from Councilmember Burgess, and the intent of this amendment is to, in effect, strike the language that would have that would allow a reduction in deadheading, as it was described previously. That would we were allowing King County only cab drivers and for hire drivers coming into the city on business to pick up fares in the city if they had a standing written retainer contract with the premises to which they were delivering the fares. This language, as proposed here in amendment number 4, would strike the 2 sections of the code that speak to that, one of them that defines the business service contract, and the other one that actually provides for the King County only vehicles to pick up fares in the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Burgess?
Thank you. I understand the intent, which is a good one, behind the language in the bill to reduce so-called deadheading, where a taxi licensed to do business in King County is allowed to bring a passenger into the city, but then has to leave the city without taking a passenger back with them. However, the way this language is written, this would allow county licensed taxis in the extreme to do all of their business in the city of Seattle and to have a contract with one or more businesses where they are taking passengers to and from that business. And I don't think our intent is to open up that large of a loophole in the ordinance to allow county licensed taxis to do business in the city in that way. So I think this issue of deadheading and how we address that is more properly addressed as we move through the pilot and do some of the other items that we've identified that we want to resolve, including our ongoing discussions with King County to perhaps have one license for the entire county and not this separation between the city and the county.
Councilmember Harrell.
So Councilmember Burgess and I have chatted a little bit about this, and the effect of his amendment basically is to strike my amendment.
No, wow.
And the reason why I think my amendment deserves support is because, first of all, I think his concern is a valid one, that if a county-only license has a contract with Microsoft and Amazon and Starbucks and a hospital, they can basically stay within the system and virtually become a city license. And they can game the system in that way, and so that is not the intent. First of all, they don't have those kinds of contracts. At best, they may have 1 or 2 contracts as we speak, but there's nothing to say they can't gain contracts. So what I had suggested was, if our concern is that county-only license, well, let me back up. It makes no sense at all for a county-only license to drop off an employee downtown for Microsoft, and a Microsoft employee that they have a contract with is there and wants to go back to Redmond, that he or she can't take them back to Redmond. They have a contract with HopeLink, where they pick up patients on state assistance. It makes no sense for them to drop off a patient on HopeLink and not be able to take the HopeLink patient back out. And that's deadheading if they aren't allowed to do this. We're trying to prevent that. So what I would suggest, first of all, I think that we can always monitor to see if the county-only license are gaming the system, or we could put in language to suggest that perhaps, and I use the term 70%, that 70% of their pickups still have to be outside the city. So in other words, only 30% would be within the city limits. And so language and that's because there's a record of their trips and a record of what they do. It's verifiable and enforceable, and then we prevent the gaming of the system, number 2. And number 3, we stop deadheading, which is, if you look at the numbers of deadheading, the numbers of gallons wasted, cars wasted, driver time wasted. These are small business owners that it makes no sense for them to have to drive all the way back out when their contracted employee is right there. So I think my amendment makes all the sense in the world for the city, for the employer, and for the driver. So
I think it was Rasmussen just by a nose, and then Bagshaw, and then Ricotta.
Well, I think that we should do all we can to eliminate the deadheading, and thank you, Councilmember Harrell, for developing language that will further that. So it's not clear to me, though, which one do you think is more effective in eliminating deadheading? That's what we want to do, and I know that we have to work with the county. So
We'll highlight that in a moment.
is it Councilmember Burgess's, or is it yours? Which one would be the most effective amendment to eliminate deadheading? We don't want people gaming the system, as you say.
I'll never speak for Councilmember Burgess, so I wouldn't take the opportunity now. But I believe mine eliminates the deadheading, and his continues business as usual, because my addition addressed the deadheading. But I'll let Councilmember Burgess speak to that.
I'll go Bagshaw, Licata, and then me.
Nice. Councilmember Harrell, I like the direction you're going. Would you talk a little bit more about the 70% issue?
Sure.
Are you talking about every day, or is it 70% over a month or over a year? Because I could imagine that somebody would get into a situation where 1 or 2 days a week, they've got a lot of comings and goings.
Yeah. I was thinking on an annual basis, but certainly, and again, there's records to verify who they're picking up.
I can support your annual basis.
Okay, let's vote. No, just kidding.
Councilmember Licata.
The examples you gave are intriguing because that would imply that the taxi would be waiting outside for that person to finish their task.
No.
So how would you...
Then in fact, that doesn't help the deadheading problem.
Right.
Typically, almost more times than not, they have a contract with the employer, not the employee. Right. So they have more than one car. So they typically have the employee right there, another employee right there. They're not coming back and say, I'll pick you up at 4, and they're coming in empty. That's not what happens. Their fleet have contracts with these employers, and so they're not coming in empty. They're coming in full, dropping off, picking up when they leave.
Right. It's just the example you gave just made me think that you had someone impatient there, and you said, why can't they take that same patient back or that same Microsoft? So
that's the existing practice. That's the existing practice right now. They drop the Microsoft employee off. Another Microsoft employee is standing right there, wants to go back to Redmond. Right. They cannot pick that person up.
No, I understand. So different. So, and there's very few contracts that exist right now?
2.
And the idea being that it's not likely that there'll be more contracts, or it's not concerned?
And because if I were them, I'd try to get as many contracts as possible. Rather than say you could only have 3 or 4 or 5 contracts, I would suggest we limit the number of pickups to 30%.
And how do we audit that?
They have a record. Unlike TNCs, by the way, there's a record of their pickups. There's logs.
And is that, I should ask Tony, is that currently being audited yet?
Well, yes, periodically by FAS. There are extensive records that the existing two-tones and taxis have to provide, and all of that information is available, and FAS periodically compiles sort of annual reports periodically. I guess annually it provides these reports, and the data are all available for people to look at.
So, me and then Councilmember Rasmussen. So when we discussed this in the last committee, the concept of it makes total sense to me, but I'm not sure that we have the language yet. So I do worry that a county-owned cab could come in, drop off at the location, some location, a random location. It would not have to be at the business that has a contract, and then go pick up from the business that has a contract. So it is a wider loophole than I think we had discussed. Loophole, I shouldn't call it that. It is a wider opening than I think we had discussed in the original committee discussion.
May I ask you a question for clarification? Yeah. So let's say the employee, they come outside the county, they're dropped off at Nordstrom's, and however, they're going to go to South Lake Union to pick up an employee from Microsoft.
And the contract is with Microsoft. Yep.
So you have a problem with that, and what's your problem?
Well, originally we had discussed that it was, and this may just be how I was understanding it, that they were actually dropping off at Microsoft.
Well,
that's usually what happens. From Microsoft.
Yeah, that's usually that. Yeah. The Microsoft employee is not going to say drop me off at Nordstrom's during business hours. Well, some of them, I suppose.
They might.
But what's wrong with that? Because what we are now requiring is, look at what we are requiring. We're saying drop me off at Nordstrom's and get the heck out of town.
Right.
So I'm trying to see what's your problem.
It's wider in terms of how that, does that really, so the idea of decreasing deadheading is that you're decreasing the vehicle miles traveled, you're decreasing the emissions associated with the vehicle miles traveled. So if you are still having somebody come into town, but they're still going from wherever the drop-off was to where the contract pickup is, I don't know that you've really decreased the vehicle miles traveled at all.
I'm not following you.
If I can drop off anywhere and then travel to the place where I have a business contract. So if I drop off...
They can already drop off anywhere.
Yep.
So we're not stopping that.
Yep.
So they drop off anywhere. Our current law says, and you can't go 3 blocks or 6 blocks and pick up your employer contracted employee. You're saying go from Nordstrom's back out to Redmond.
Right.
And what I'm suggesting is, if you have a contract with that employer, you can go and pick that up. And I think that, and particularly in light of the fact that we're looking at TNCs coming in the market, we're looking at an opportunity to stop the deadheading. Everyone says we want to stop deadheading, and this is the attempt to do that. And as soon as we have a great opportunity and a policy basis to do it, we don't want to stop deadheading.
I think we want to stop deadheading to decrease the vehicle miles traveled impact, though, and the wideness of this, I'm not sure quite gets there. Councilmember Rasmussen and Councilmember Licata.
Councilmember Harrell, currently the contract says you can bring someone in from Microsoft. If you drop them off at a Microsoft office, you can't take another employee back to Microsoft, to the main campus. Okay.
That's
well, that's weird. So we should change that.
Yep.
That's my amendment.
For sure. I'm with you there. The other thing that I would like to reform or change is if there's someone who happens to be there at the drop-off point who's not a Microsoft employee, but they need to go to Redmond and not Microsoft, they say, and they happen to see that, they would say, could you take me to Redmond rather than taking the empty vehicle or the empty taxi back? That's what I would like us to be able to do, or that person be able to do too, rather than having the driver drive an empty vehicle back to Redmond. That flexibility, it doesn't have to be a Microsoft employee or contractor, the employer of the contracted agency.
So and I think we'd like to get there.
Does that require work with the county to be able to do that?
Yeah.
Okay,
because
we should put that on our list.
So it is in the resolution, actually, to try to move towards something that is a much less confusing system where you can have a much freer flow and a much more dynamic and responsive system, while also ensuring that if you live out in the county, you have a certain expectation of service that can be met, and not all of the cars are trolling around downtown Bellevue or Redmond or Seattle. Councilmember Licata.
Yeah, I think I'm going in that direction because my thought is, logically, it doesn't make sense to do deadheading. On the other hand, how big of a problem is that? I don't know how many, are we talking about an instance that occurs once a week? Are we talking something once a day? And the practical effect is what I'm concerned about, because what would stop, I mean, if I was owning a county cabs or dispatcher on the east side, I'd sign as many contracts as possible. And the practical effect of that, I would think, is that you'd have more taxis on the road competing with those that are licensed just in Seattle who aren't going out to county. So I think it's a loophole that could be exploited in the solution of a problem that we're not sure how big it is. As a result, I would suggest that if we're going to change the game, we need to look at it a little further and maybe arrange something so there's equal access to both county and city, and maybe you need to go regionally. But this seems like if we were to not make Burgess's amendment, I'm concerned that we'd be changing the rules of the game in a way that would not really would be unfair to Seattle licensed taxi cabs.
Councilmember Burgess.
May I close debate here?
I hope so.
So I very much respect the intent of trying to solve the deadheading problem, and I don't think my amendment solves the deadheading problem. I don't think Councilmember Harrell's original language does that either. I think the deadheading issue is addressed regionally and going to a single system of county and city licensing. If a company that holds a county taxi license today wants to sign a contract with a business in Seattle to provide service, they can do that today and get a city taxi license. And there are many that have dual licenses. So there's nothing that prevents them from doing that today, especially if we're going to increase the number of licenses for taxis. I think the way the language is in the bill today, we need to put this in the context of all the other changes we're making. So we are indicating that we are going to increase the number of taxi licenses by 50, 75, or 100 in each of the next 2 years. We're going to allow flat rate for hire vehicles to take street hails. That's approximately 200. And we're going to do whatever we're going to do with TNCs. This language that's in the bill here needs to be viewed in that context as well. And with the language as it's written today, it could result in dozens, if not over 100 additional taxis doing business in Seattle. And I think we should be very careful about going that direction until we have that very clear.
Councilmember Harrell.
So first of all, they can't just get the license unless they have a few $100,000. There's no license for these folks to get, so that's not true. Number two, that this does address the deadheading head on. It does address the deadheading issue. And number three, Councilman Licata, and I don't expect any of you to have attended the other 12 meetings. I have not missed one meeting. And I will tell you that we had an enormous amount of information on how much gas is wasted and how much time is wasted on this issue. That we heard testimony from these drivers that are doing that and playing by the rules, by the way, dropping off a person, looking at the employee, just wanting to go back to Redmond, and they're saying that we can't take you back. So if we ever do go to a dual license model, which I think we should consider that, this sets a policy direction to head us in the right direction. And once again, we're punting on the issue. This is the time to address the deadheading issue. It's a very simple, it's verifiable. It's one of the few experiences in the taxi cab industry that we can verify whether the 70%, as an example, is being done or not. You're talking about them gaming the system and having multiple employment contracts. Well, there's limousines out there, there's town cars out there, and so if we're going toward a meritocracy and these county-only licensed folks have contracts with employers, then I think we should encourage that if that's what the employer wants, that's what the corporation wants. So again, the original language does address deadheading, it is verifiable, and we're not looking at flooding the market with a lot of these entrants. But what I would like to get to you is the information on the gas wasted and vehicle miles traveled because of this problem, and it is significant. And we've had that information.
Clarification question here?
Sure.
Since it seems like debate is closed. If we vote...
That's the perfect time to ask a clarification question.
Thank you. Since what I'm hearing is that Councilmember Burgess's proposal would undercut what Councilmember Harrell is proposing, a vote against Councilmember Burgess's amendment supports Councilmember Harrell's original proposal?
If you want the original proposal, if you want the language that is currently in the ordinance to remain, you will vote against Councilmember Burgess's amendment.
And does that support what you articulated, Councilmember Harrell?
Yes.
I think that's right.
Yes.
Voting no is yes. For you.
Yeah.
Voting no is yes for me. But I'm actually will because I think Councilmember Burgess is correct on the point that we're not trying to allow anyone to game the system, and so that's why. So my original language does not address the 70% issue, which I was as a compromise because I would agree that we don't want anyone gaming the system. I would put in language to suggest that the county onlys can have more than 30% of the rides to be within the city.
Councilmember Smith.
So just to clarify the whole no yes thing, voting no on this amendment means voting yes on Councilmember Harrell's proposed language. But given the debate, is it possible to have a vote where if you're voting yes on Councilmember Harrell's, or voting no on this, meaning you're voting yes on Councilmember Harrell's proposed language, can that be conditional on us looking at the language and seeing if we can introduce clauses that will ensure the problems that Councilmember Burgess is?
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of describing it. So I apologize to Councilmember Harrell for this, but I'm going to vote for the amendment right now because in terms of like sketching out how this all happens, I would much rather see it be more tightly constrained to say that if you're dropping off at the place where you've got the contract, that's where you can pick up the next employee the next ride, excuse me, but not have it be that you're dropping off someplace in the city, and then you get to go pick up at the contracted business. But I understand the desire that I think we've all voiced to get away from what is a complicated three type of licensing system and have it be just clearer for consumers and clearer for the taxi industry as well.
So how are you going to propose we unravel this? I didn't just say a third way.
I don't think I did propose a third way. I'm going to vote against this. If I'm counting heads, this is going to fail. But I think there is going to be a desire to either figure out how to more tightly constrain this before the 27th, and we've already got it in the resolution that we would be working with King County towards a longer-term goal of clarifying the system and getting away from the three licenses that we've got right now.
Do we even have to call for a vote on it? Why not just not vote on it and...
Right. Sally gets a bonus for every amendment that passes.
I know, I'm earning here, people.
Can we have the clarification that if you vote no on the Burgess amendment, that we will look for revised language before the 27th?
We can make an amendment.
Yep, you got the 27th, people. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and just to be clear,
That's my preference also, is I think we need to do more work with regard to the language of one or the others of these, and so either we don't vote on this point 4, Burgess Amendment number 2, or we do, as Councilmember Sawant said, perhaps vote down, hang on here, Councilmember Burgess's amendment, and then we'll do more wordsmithing to make sure we're comfortable with the language that Councilmember Harrell is proposing.
Councilmember Licata.
I would just move that we hold it and look at new wording, because, I mean, it's just been an exercise, a useless exercise. We all want to see it changed and tightened up. So I'd like to see new wording presented and then vote on that.
Councilmember Burgess? Acceptable? All right, there goes my bonus. Fine. We're holding that one. Let's move on to the next amendment, for God's sake.
Before we do,
yes.
just, I am concerned about enforcement. That's one of the problems we too often make, is that we assume we have something on the books that's going to work. So I would like to confirm, or at least tighten up, how do we assure that we have that 70%, even though we know it can be measured. Do we have staff that will measure it? Is it tied in? So
it's really measuring it after the fact as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Okay. So we should address that as well.
Next amendment, please.
okay, this is